So the topic that we're looking at is basically a topic that looks at the gender gap in the tourism sector in South Africa. And our emphasis is on employability, whether women will be able to get employment after the pandemic. So I'm going to take you through just a few slides, and then I'm going to give over to my colleagues who will also take you through the analysis of the data that we collected. But all the data is based in South Africa, so the results that you're going to see relate to South Africa specifically. So when we look at the tourism sector in South Africa prior to the pandemic, you would realize that, you can all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So you realize that prior to the pandemic, the tourism sector in South Africa supported almost 1.5 million jobs across the economy. And of those jobs, maybe 70% of them are women, that is prior to the pandemic. And despite the number of women employees in the sector, it is quite disheartening to know that women hold less than 40% of all the managerial positions in the sector, and less than 20% of the general management positions in the sector, and less than 8% of the board positions in the industry. Quite interestingly, I was in a board meeting last Friday in our hotel school, and in that board meeting we had about 16 permanent members of the board, and of the 16 members of the board, only 4 of them were women. So it was quite interesting to also see kind of some of the information that we're presenting in our paper in terms of the realities of what's happening in the ground. When we talk of working in the tourism industry in South Africa, it is believed that working in this sector is regarded as almost synonymous with subsistence level pay and very poor working conditions. And in some cases, it's often considered dirty work. It is also known that when you work in the tourism industry in the country, there is overworking, including night work, which I think is normal, and there is a lot of holiday work. In majority of cases, most of the people that work in the industry, their level of education is very low, and the return on education investment is also very low. It is also believed that in the industry, there is occupational segregation and exploitation. And in some extreme cases, in some contexts, it is regarded as almost modern day slavery. Employment in the industry is influenced by seasonality. And if we speak of the current time, we are in high season, but the seasonality culminates in part-time work. And the jobs in the industry command high levels of insecurity. And it can also be antisocial in demand. It is regarded as low status and with limited desirability. Most of the semi-skilled and unskilled women tend to work in the most vulnerable positions, such as cleaning, in the bar as waiters, and where they experience poor working conditions. And there's a lot of inequality in terms of opportunities, in terms of treatment, in terms of how they experience violence. And it is also believed that the level of stress is quite high, and there is a little bit of sexual harassment in the industry, especially when it comes to women. What is most disheartening is that most of the employees in the sector cannot afford the luxury they offer to their clients. And the wage rate is not only lower, in some instances, employees are paid less than the minimum wage, and the situation is worse for women. I think you can move on to the next one. So when we look at the gender gap or the gender disparity in the tourism sector in South Africa, in terms of the review of the gender disparity prior the pandemic, it shows that the South African tourism and hospitality industries were already significant, and the disparities between male and women and female employees in these industries were already apparent due to the economic and cultural factors. And a divergence between qualifications and workplace realities is observable for women. And there is quite overwhelming evidence to say that there is a glass ceiling when it comes to women. And that glass ceiling kind of blocks women from progressing in the industry to high-paying executive positions. And research also found out that gender negatively affects women in terms of their income, which can also not be attributed to the hours worked or the educational level of the individual or the organizational structure. And furthermore, women have been found to hold lower quality jobs compared to men, and the gender gap widens as you go up. There is underrepresentation of women in the leadership positions, as I alluded to earlier, in the sector, with some justifying this by highlighting that women employees may disrupt their working lives due to preference to marriage and caring for children, which is quite strange. This is magnified by the occupational aspects of the job, such as the long hours of work or handling of alcoholic beverages and high mobility rates that you find in the industry. And work-life conflict and the old boys network have also created an invisible blockage for women career advancement in the sector. So when we look, maybe we can move on to the next one. So when we look at the COVID pandemic or the COVID crisis and its impact on the tourism sector in South Africa, it is predicted already by the United Nations World Tourism Organization that it will have a huge negative impact on employment in the tourism sector in general, and for female employees in particular, which might worsen the gender inequalities and widen the gender gap in South Africa. It is believed that South Africa ranked number 17 on the Global Gender Gap Report of 2019. COVID-19 pandemic forced quite a number of firms in South Africa to reduce their staff, and in some instances, firms had to make their staff redundant. So while South Africa is one of the world's most popular destinations, it is estimated that the sector has lost more than 54.2 billion in output and more than 438,000 jobs by the end of May alone. And this economic impact of the pandemic is expected to be particularly significant for women in the country, because fewer women in tourism are employed in positions which can be undertaken remotely. Like I've been working at home, but unfortunately, if you are a waiter, you can't really, perform your duties while you are at home. And this has aggravated the existing vulnerabilities and forced women to rely greatly on informal employment, which in some cases has resulted in what you have heard in the country being talked about, the gender-based violence. I'm going to give over to my colleague who is going to continue with the presentation. Thank you.
Hello, thank you, Juliet. Good afternoon, everybody. So I will just be presenting a little bit of more context of our research and a bit of a result that we came up with. There are results that, of course, are preliminary because we're also looking at a more long-term collection of these results. So basically, just the context before we start with the hypothesis is that, of course, South Africa has not really recovered after the 2008 economic downturn, of course, so when you have, of course, the financial market downturn. So what happened is that after that, one other countries, maybe also in the Southern Africa, has experienced a much higher growth of the GDP. South Africa was quite sluggish, and because of that, has implicitly had also an impact on the employment levels, which already pre-crisis were quite high. And then, of course, eventually that created also a bigger impact on the gender gap in employment amongst genders in South Africa, between genders in South Africa. South Africa has tried to develop legislation in this regard that addressing inequality, and there are literature and there are legislation that is proof of that. However, it has been implemented quite very patchily and actually not very correctly. And because of that, actually, some of the legislation or some of the policies applied actually sometimes did increase the problem actually rather than solve it. Yeah. So, and this is basically what was the context of South African labor market, which has always been quite a contentious one and quite a difficult one. As we go into the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown issuing from that. So to look at the tourism, hospitality industry, okay, thank you. And we're just looking at 60% of the workforce is female, right? So that's quite a big percentage of the people employed in the tourism industry, but they only hold less than 40%. So actually, while there are a lot of female employed in the tourism industry, traditionally as well, there is, as Juliet has mentioned, seems to be quite a barrier for them to advance in a career-wise. The next slide, thank you. So we had three hypotheses that we are researching based on the whole literature and based on the situation in South Africa. What we're trying to look at, because we're trying to see, let's say, forecast what might be some of the impact of COVID on already existing problems in the labor market in tourism from a gender perspective. We looked at people's opinions, of also people's perception, whether or not what would be actually the situation, the current and more importantly, the future situation due to COVID, based on the possibility to finding employment, possibility to actually keep their own employment, and also what are some of the most important factors, as you see there from the third hypothesis, what are some of the most important factors that could influence employability for the future? So current employability, but also future employability. So first we looked at unemployed respondents, employed respondents, and of course then look at all the respondents and the three factors that we identify as being some of the major, let's say, drivers for finding employment. Can you next? Okay, so far we have what we have at the moment, 101 hospitality professionals, or people working in the hospitality industry, hospitality and tourism industry. So there's, of course, this sample includes people from all walks of life, starting from waiters, including upper management. We have collected the data, of course, due to circumstances. There was an online collection of the data. All right, so we still would like to actually follow up on this and actually collect more data, look at what happens beyond the first, what we call the first wave or the second wave of COVID impact. From this, 54% were female of the respondents and 46 male. Average age quite young, 32 years old of the respondents. That's quite specific to the hospitality or to the tourism industry in South Africa. So that's quite a characteristic. So a lot of young people that otherwise would be quite difficult to find jobs, they're trying to actually get into the hospitality or the tourism hospitality industry in South Africa, and they actually started to actually get some kind of a diploma or degree to get into this industry. The more than just over 51%, so it was quite balanced. 51% of the respondents were employed at the time of the interview, so currently employed. And from this, quite a high percentage were full-time employed, 82.2% and 70.8% were on a part-time basis employed. So this is a bit of outlook on the sample that we have. Next slide, please. Okay, so also we look at the educational background. As you can see here, quite a large percentage of the respondents had either diploma, bachelor, then of course lower on the master doctorate levels, but diploma, bachelor, quite a high percentage, and then also quite a relatively high percentage also had respondents that finished school, right? So they had grade 12, so end of grade school diploma. So of course, from this point of view, this sample, of course, needs to actually be a bit more balanced, because we also said that there's a lot of people that actually have quite low education, and there are lots of literature that, but of course, they might not have access to internet, and they might not have access to our way of collecting the data. So this is what we want to look at, a follow-up of actually maybe, if possible, in the future to actually collect that and maybe more on a more, let's say, live basis. Then you can actually access even people that have maybe a lower educational level. All right, so what we looked at, a quick results here. So we looked at the results for the first hypothesis was that actually, if you remember that actually that the female respondents that are unemployed compared to male respondents have a low perception. So this is a perception of actually employment opportunities, and that basically it's shown in the unemployed. So if unemployed part, you can see that actually there was The first hypothesis did hold up. There's a difference. So the females are more pessimistic about job opportunities than male. It looks quite significant, the differences in perception whether or not there is some kind of possibilities to obtain jobs. So that's from an unemployment respondent perspective. For employment respondent perspective, actually our hypothesis is reversed. So we said that actually even from people already employed, we will have a more, let's say, pessimistic view of the female having possibilities to keep their job or to advance in their job. Actually, the male are the ones that are more pessimistic, and that's quite significant as well. So female are more confident in job opportunities once employed than male. And then, of course, we looked at the different factors. We identified 3 factors that might have an impact on job opportunities of employability, let's put it this way. And that was gender. We looked at gender, we look at age, we look at education, right? And whether or not there is some impact amongst them. And from our research so far, gender seems to be the only one that actually, from the opinion of the respondents, has an impact on obtaining a job in the tourism hospitality industry or maintaining that job. So gender seems to be one of the factors that actually has most influence in the views of the respondents on of a career advancement, but also actually obtaining a job or employment opportunities in the industry. So far, age and education don't seem to have any impact from the view, again, of the respondents. And I will give the floor or the screen to Rinaldi to actually come out to a bit of overview and the conclusion of our research. Thank you.
Thank you, Radu. I will go very briefly through the findings and the last the recommendations. So which are the main findings, as Radu just said? Yes, we already know that from our own daily life experience that COVID-19 is going actually to amplify the unequal intra-household allocation of unpaid work. This is currently happening actually also in Italy, and we know it very well. And actually, according to our hypothesis number 3, uncertainty is higher for unemployed women who would still like to find a job in the hospitality sector in South Africa. And yeah, as we saw, gender seems to be quite an explanatory factor, much more than age and education, like Radu just said. Maybe we can go to the last slide. Yes, I guess we have 2 minutes. So what we have here, we know that in South Africa, especially like in other African countries, there is a special need for policies and legislation also that are really capable of supporting women and their rights for equal treatment and also equal opportunities. And we believe that this is part of the real success of any attempt of recovery of the tourism sector. And also we know that further reinforcement of the gender status quo that we know that we experienced before the lockdown could have a large negative effect on the market level supply in this sector, in the hospitality and tourism sector. There is a special need, as we said, for further development policies in which funds and incentives are provided, and so our new partnerships are developed. And obviously we have much room actually for improvement, because we had, due to the pandemic, very few time. And it's actually Radu already said, we have this will of also further exploring our analysis or our basis of analysis. Actually, we're also thinking about trying to make the same analysis even here in Italy and also in the Netherlands, where Radu lives and works. And also because this is, as we know, this is a crucial moments, and if we fail to take advantage of the opportunities that also the crisis is creating, we are losing. We are really losing one shot. So thank you very much.